Created by Cable for Canadians.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Paikin of TVO. We're at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa for the English Language Federal Election Debate. We have 2 hours to hear from the 5 major party leaders, and let me introduce them to you. Stephen Harper is the Conservative Party leader. Stéphane Dion is the leader of the Liberal Party. Gilles Duceppe is the leader of the Bloc Québécois. Jack Layton leads the New Democratic Party. And Elizabeth May is the Green Party leader. We asked you to send us questions for these leaders, and you did. More than 4,500 questions. Journalists from Global, CTV, and the CBC read them all and then asked 8 people to record their questions for this broadcast. Now, the party leaders were given the broad themes of the questions, for example, the environment, justice, healthcare, but they do not know what will actually be asked. Everyone here knows the rules that we're working with and the format of the debate. We made a decision to give priority to an issue dominating the news and people's concerns these days, the economy. So there will be an expanded debate on that. And we begin with a question from one of our viewers. Here we go. Roll tape, please.
Hello from Calgary. If you were elected Prime Minister, what steps would you take to stabilize Canada's export-driven economy in the midst of a global economic slowdown and a pending recession with our most lucrative partner, the United States?
Okay, we start with 45-second uninterrupted statements and then go to some discussion after that. So, Ms. May, you're up first.
Well, thanks, Mr. D'Ambrosio from Calgary. Clearly, a Prime Minister needs to reassure the Canadian public that there is a difference between the crisis in the United States and what we're experiencing here. But equally clearly, the United States is heading for a recession, is already in a recession. Canada's economic health needs to be buttressed quickly. First thing I would do is put a freeze on the takeover of our corporations. We've lost Inco, Falconbridge, Hudson Bay. We need to protect our corporations because the foreign direct investment there is actually driving up the Canadian dollar. We need to take steps to reduce the dollar's value against the United States so that we can drive up our export-driven industries, protecting the manufacturing sector, forestry, and we need to look long-term to invest in sustainable jobs, to invest in Canada so that it's not just the short-term we look after, but our kids' economy and our future.
Thank you, Ms. May. Monsieur Dion.
Mr. D'Ambrosio, it's because I know very well how much Canadians care and are concerned about their savings, their mortgages, and their pensions, that I think that the government has a role to play right now. We have an action plan that I released yesterday. For the first 30 days of a Liberal government, we'll do something like, for example, we'll speed up the investment to build infrastructure and to help the manufacturing sector to create jobs and employment and economic activity in Canada. We'll ask to the regulatory agencies of our country, like the Bank of Canada, their recommendation to be sure that we'll be able to protect your savings, your mortgages, and your pensions. We have a plan. We'll act right now.
Stephen Harper.
Obviously, economic uncertainty is the big question of this election, and Canadians are worried about the volatility in markets. What leaders have to do is have a plan and not panic. Last night, Stéphane, you panicked. You came on the set and announced a whole new economic plan in the middle of a national debate. You know, I know why you did that, because you look at your platform. Your platform says we will spend billions of dollars we don't have and go into deficit. We will raise taxes that will kill jobs. You will create a carbon tax that will drive up prices. I believe we have to keep this economy, we have to keep our budget in surplus. We have to make investments that will create jobs, and we have to keep taxes down. And I think that's the central choice of this economy and the central choice of this election.
Jack Layton.
Well, the issue before us is one that we're all concerned about, and you're right to raise it, because with the economic turmoil in the U.S. and with the loss of thousands of manufacturing and forestry jobs here in Canada, we need some action. And a further big tax cut to the big corporations that Mr. Harper's proposing, or a new tax that Mr. Dion is proposing, is the wrong way to go. What we would do is bring in effective regulations on our financial sector right away to make sure that your savings are protected and that we don't end up with a meltdown or a big payout to protect the banks. And secondly, we would invest in the fundamentals of the real economy. And we've laid out a comprehensive plan to do that in this election. You know, if we were to stand up for the real economy and working families like yours, then the banks and the economy as a whole will be just fine.
Thank you, Mr. Layton. Gilles Duceppe.
I think that was a very good question because we're facing a very serious situation. The problem is, though, that, and just heard Stephen Harper, I don't think he takes that seriously. Just like George Bush a few months ago. It's like the don't worry, be happy. And they have the same attitude because they share the same ideology, the economic laissez-faire. It has disastrous consequences, not only in the United States, but also for the manufacturing and forestry sectors, especially in Quebec, in Ontario. They have the same philosophy, the invisible hand. He believes in the invisible hand, and I think the problem is the invisible hand is in hand with the rich oil companies. I think the state has a role to play to help the companies and to help the workers, the first victims of that crisis.
Okay, Monsieur Duceppe. We now go to the open discussion period, and I think in fairness, I'm going to start with Monsieur Dion,
yes,
given what we
Mr.
just
Harper,
heard.
you have shown only that you have no idea what to do except to distort the Liberal plan. You have nothing to propose. And Mr. Harper, doing nothing is not an option. What we have proposed yesterday has nothing to do with doing nothing. It's to act right now because, you know what? Canadians care about their savings. They care about their mortgages. They care about their pension. They want a government ready to help them in the short term and with a strong plan in the long term. And I have no lesson to learn from you about how to balance a budget, and they tell you that.
Monsieur Harper, response, Mr. Harper, and then we'll get Ms. May.
Let's be clear about what the situation is. We have not been following the same policies as the United States. The economic and financial mess in the United States is disastrous. The policies have been irresponsible. We've made very different choices in Canada. We have a budget that's in surplus, not a budget that's in deficit. We're paying off debt in Canada, not adding to our debt. We are creating jobs in this country. Even this slow year, we're still creating jobs. We're not losing jobs. Our mortgage and housing sector, we took actions early to ensure we had good regulation of our financial institutions, to ensure we didn't have the subprime crisis here. We have our banks are in a solid position. We're not bailing out big companies in Canada. We're investing in infrastructure, technology, communities, and workers. And that's what we should be doing.
Ms. May?
With all due respect, Mr. Harper, you're the one who asked for the expanded time on the economy last night and tonight. Both nights I was waiting to hear what you thought you should do about the situation. I wondered why you even wanted the time on the economy last night, because you offered nothing up. And again tonight, you've spent your time attacking the policies of others and saying, look at their platform. Well, where's your platform? Yours is the only party that hasn't put forward any platform yet in this election. All the other parties have. And I think it's important to note that the international economic community looking at Canada, the OECD report, actually recommends that the health of Canada's economy would be improved if we reduce the taxes on income and payroll and put them on carbon instead. That's an international recommendation from other countries that have done the same. It's not economically disastrous. It's a smart economic thing to do.
Mr. Layton and Monsieur Duceppe.
Mr. Harper, you're wrong to say that you're not following the course of action that we've seen in the States. In fact, what you've proposed is large corporate tax cuts, and you're proposing $50 billion more. This is precisely the direction that has led the U.S. to have the problem that it's facing. And what do you tell Canadians? Everything is fine about the economy. The economy is not fine, and if you talk to Canadians today, that's what they'll tell you. Now, either you don't care or you're incompetent. Which is it?
Well, he deserves a chance to respond to that before I get to you, Monsieur Duceppe. Go ahead.
Let me answer this. We identified, everybody knew about this financial crisis in August 2007. That's why we began acting the fall of last year to bring forward a tax reduction package that would help consumers, help business, help families. Now, Jack, you say it's $50 billion tax cut for business. That's true. I don't dispute that. But it was a $200 billion tax cut package. 3/4 of that was for families, was for small business, was for individuals.
But why do banks and oil companies need that kind of help right now when families are suffering?
No, but let me talk about that's important, because you said one of the things you pointed out last night that is a valid point is that what Canadians are worried about right now is not the job situation, not losing their home like in the U.S. What they're worried about is they see the stock market problems. We see big drops in the stock market in the energy sector, in the commodity sector, some in the financial sector.
People lost their jobs.
And what the opposition proposes,
how can you say nobody's worried? about the job loss.
Gentlemen, I have to manage the time here. Monsieur Doucette, please. I
Yes,
have to
I
manage
think
the time.
we have to realize we have two types of economies in Canada. One linked to the rich oil companies, and the other one based on the manufacturing sector, which is in recession for the last 3 years. If we do believe Jim Flaherty, your own finance minister, in the economic statement he made last October, page 28, it's very clear. So I think we have to develop policies to help the manufacturing sector. They don't make profits, so they don't pay any income tax. So we have to put reimbursable tax credit for research and development for the companies, and we have to have a better employment insurance for the workers. Only 40% of them receive benefits when they're losing their jobs, and they're the first victims of that crisis.
Time to hear from Monsieur Dion.
Yes, Mr. Harper, you inherited from the strongest economic situation a prime minister never had, and you had that from previous Liberal governments. In 2.5 years, we have now what? The lowest economic growth of the G8 countries. Only in July, we lost 95,000 jobs in the private sector. For 9 months in a row, our productivity rate is going down. It never happened since 1991. You come last fall with a rosy mini budget that put us very close to a deficit. And your Minister of Finance never had a better idea than to tell the world to not invest in Ontario, and you kept him. How you can have done that? This is the situation in which we are.
Response?
And doing nothing is not an option.
Response from Mr. Harper, then Ms.
Can I
May.
be clear what we've done? As I said, we introduced a tax package early. We didn't keep a large amount of money in Ottawa. We made sure it went back into the economy, so we created jobs. We've created close to 100,000 net new jobs this year. I know there have been job losses, but there have been more jobs created than lost, and that's important that we hold on to that. Now, the opposition, Jack just said it, wants to put big taxes on companies that are making money, but look at the markets. Look at the markets. You talk about the oil and gas sector, financial sector. Some of these stocks are weak. This would be the wrong time. Putting taxes on these companies will only penalize jobs and will only hurt pensioners and others who have investments in these funds. It doesn't. Raising taxes right now, which is what all the opposition parties propose, simply does not
Ms.
make
May,
sense.
then Mr. Layton.
Listen, Mr. Harper, you are so out of touch with people when you can say they're not worried about losing their homes, they're not worried about making ends meet. The people who've lost their jobs in my community when Trenton Works shut down, I can tell you I meet people every single day who are worried about how they're going to keep their homes. Maybe the rich people who had enough investments that they're panicked, and they don't have to be very rich to have investments. I'm not saying that anyone who's worried right now is in a category of being out of touch, but you're out of touch if you don't know that people are fundamentally worried who've lost their jobs in industries that they could have held on to if your economic policies hadn't favored one region over others. And again, the OECD report says Canada is at risk of Dutch disease. And if we're going to avoid that, we need to have the dollar at a level that's competitive. I agree with you. We don't want to raise taxes throughout society. We want to cut income taxes because your tax package cut the wrong taxes.
Okay, let's go to
Every
Mr.
economist in this
Just a minute, please.
It cut primarily GST. It didn't cut income tax deeply enough at all.
Mr. Layton and Monsieur Dion.
You know, I think, Mr. Harper, what we're seeing is a cold and callous side here. When you say that people aren't worried about their jobs, I don't know whether you go to these factories where people are thrown out of work. I've been to so many of them, watching guys who've worked in a plant for 30 years, sometimes with their father, breaking down in tears because they're not going to be able to go back to work. And what are they being asked to do by these companies who you want to give tax breaks to? They're being asked to put moving stickers on the equipment so it can go to China. Why do you give tax cuts to companies like John Deere and other ones that are going to simply pick up our jobs and take them somewhere else? Take some responsibility here and don't try to paper over what's happening in people's lives.
Look, I've been very clear.
Then we'll go here.
Of course there have been jobs lost, but there have been more jobs created. We don't have a mortgage meltdown in Canada. We don't have a banking crisis in Canada. We should recognize the strength of our economy and act to make those things
Why don't you take
stronger.
action now on these issues?
That's why
Stand
we're
by,
doing
please.
these things.
Stand by.
about
Monsieur
it. It's
Dion.
not gonna work.
Monsieur, I need to hear Monsieur
I agree
Dion.
that we have a better bank system than the United States, thanks to Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, who resisted to all the requests to have more deregulation and bank mergers. measures, and it was pushed by a lot of conservative people that thought it was a good thing to do. We resisted because we had sound liberal policy. It's what we need to continue to have. I will give you an example of your laissez-faire, I don't care approach. Each time we have asked you to do something about the manufacturing sector in the House, you were answering, well, the economy will create jobs elsewhere. To have a strong economy, you need to have a strong manufacturing sector. You need to build that on a strong manufacturing sector, and the Liberal plan is about that.
Monsieur Duceppe, and we'll give Mr. Harper
I
a
never
chance
said
to
we have
respond.
to raise taxes. I said that you have to stop making fiscal gifts to the rich oil company. This is another story. This year it's $2,350 million. And I think one of the biggest error you're making is not linking environment to economy. We have to apply Kyoto. Modern economies can't be developed apart from the environment. It goes together. We call that sustainable development. And your party and yourself are just acting against Kyoto, against modern economy, with all the disastrous consequences we'll be facing not only for the planet, but for the economy of Quebec and Canada.
Chance for Mr. Harper to respond.
Let's be clear about what we are doing about some of these problems. We've brought in tax incentives for machinery and equipment investment in manufacturing. That is aiding the sector to make a transformation. In fact, the manufacturers and exporters are calling for the extension of that. We have targeted investments in forestry, in automobiles, in the aerospace sector. We have the Community Development Fund for communities in trouble. January 1st this year, we're creating the tax-free savings accounts so Canadian families can save, and we'll create a pool of national savings to encourage investment. These are all things that we are doing.
I did promise Ms. May next. Go ahead.
Yeah,
We'll get
Mr.
back to
Harper,
you.
I don't know how far you've changed in your views of the unemployed since the speech you gave in '97, where you said to Americans, don't feel badly about the Canadian unemployed. They're doing just fine because of our system of insurance and generous social welfare. Those programs, unemployment insurance, have gone down. Workers who are unemployed are running out of their unemployment insurance. And the jobs that are being created are lower productivity, service economy jobs. The jobs that are being lost are the higher productivity, manufacturing, pulp and paper sector jobs. And that's just not my opinion. That's the conclusion. Again, I hate to tell you, you really should read the OECD report on Canada's economy, because it gives you some good advice, which you seem to have ignored.
Jack Layton, please.
Elizabeth is dead on here, Mr. Harper. She's referring to what's really happening in the real economy. I don't know who you get your advice from, whether they're all CEOs from Bay Street. But I'll tell you, what is going on, Mr. Howard or Mr. Bush, he's on the way out. We think that your idea should be on the way out too, and it's because it's leaving people having to do 2 or 3 jobs to stay where they were. Canadian families are working 290 hours more per month than they used to work. And you talk about our employment insurance being there for them and things like that. We've seen slashes from the previous government, and you've done nothing to deal with that, affecting especially women. It's as though there's this kind of cold-hearted attitude that we're going to let everybody sink or swim, and it's not the right time for that as we're in the middle of economic turbulence.
Monsieur Duceppe and then Mr. Harper.
Mr. Harper, I just don't see how you can say that you're helping the companies in the manufacturing sector by reducing their income tax. They're not making any profits, so they don't pay taxes. This is why we're asking for reimbursable tax credit, and I insist on reimbursable, because then they will have some money for research and development. We have to target very specific issue and help them a very specific way to face the huge challenges of the emerging economies in China and India.
Well,
this is what we have to do.
You've asked, is that something you can see your government doing?
We're already, as I said, making investments, already giving incentives for investment, and already making major investments in research and development and science and technology in this country.
Tax credit,
we're already making $7 billion worth of investments, $7 billion worth of investments in the development of our environmental technology. I was asked earlier about EI. We've said in this election campaign, one of the things we're going to do with the EI system is open that system so that self-employed individuals, particularly women, can access maternity and parental leave benefits. That's something that I think you should be supporting.
Monsieur Dion.
Well, we have this laissez-faire, no-care approach. We have an approach that would be far too socialist, and we have the good approach to the center that always have been good for Canada, and it's the one we need to follow with very fiscal discipline to avoid deficit. We need to have investments in our infrastructure, investment in our manufacturing sector system. We need to cut the taxes on the productive activities, on our savings, on our income. We need to shift it to pollution. It's what the countries that are successful in the 21st century are doing. There are a lot of things to do. For that, we need to have a government that believes in the role of the government to help the people.
Jack Layton.
Well, Mr. Dion, I've got to say, you want to support the $50 billion of corporate tax cuts that Mr. Harper wants to do, plus you also want to do all these investments and add a tax. It doesn't add up. And the problem with Mr. Harper's approach, which, by the way, you've supported for the last year, I don't know why you kept him in power so long if you disagree with him so much, but his approach is what we've seen in the U.S. Pin everything on a corporate tax cut and assume that all will be well. The real economy requires investment in infrastructure for our cities so investors come, investment in education and training so we have the workers, investment in green and advanced technologies for the next century.
Okay.
And you have no plan along those lines. It's all let things just keep on flowing. That's a recipe for trouble.
Mr. Layton's answer started by making some allegations about Monsieur Dion. I have to give him a chance to respond.
Mr. Because in fact, Mr. Layton, every expert who look at our plan said that the numbers add up, and we'll have in fact a $3 billion of buffer, a contingency reserve to avoid a deficit that Mr. Harper shamefully abandoned. And in fact, I guess you have a stronger admiration for Sweden, which has a very strong economy and very close to reach its Kyoto target. What they have done there, they have cut taxes on income of the people and income of the companies. The corporate tax is very low in Sweden, and they tax pollution instead. To cut the corporate tax is something the Liberal government did well before Mr. Harper. It's not a it's not a right-wing policy. It's not a left-wing policy. It's a sound policy to tax pollution instead.
Can I get in here for a
in
second?
those countries is the cap and trade program that we and
Mr. Layton, if I might, just a minute, gentlemen and lady, if I can for a second here, there have been hundreds of thousands of lost manufacturing jobs in the country. I don't have to tell you folks, you know all about it. I want to know whether you five think those jobs are gone for good. Are those jobs gone for good? Mr. Harper?
Absolutely not.
I think the reality is that the economy is changing, and I do think the reality is that when a job is lost, it's unlikely to come back. What we have to do is make sure we get the jobs of the future. That's why we're doing things like strategic investments in technology in the automobile and aerospace sector. It's why we're investing, why we're encouraging manufacturers to invest in new equipment and machinery, because they have to be able to transform, to identify the markets so they can compete in a global economy. It's why we have a science and technology strategy. You know, what we're going to have to do is face the fact that the economy will continue to change. No politician can guarantee an individual job. What we've got to be able to do is guarantee that as we lose some jobs, we gain more. And that's so far what we have been doing. We've got to continue on that track.
This is why I asked Mr. Harper twice tonight, and I'll do it for the third time. I'm asking you, why don't you give reimbursable tax credit to the manufacturing sector? Those companies who are not making profits, if they want to have that money, it has to be reimbursable. I'm asking you for the third time, could you deny that you're not giving reimbursable tax credit?
The present policy is not a reimbursable credit. It is a tax credit.
What do you think happened to those companies? They don't make any profits.
It is a tax credit. It is a tax. Well,
not reimbursable. They're not making profits.
You have to let him answer.
They're not making profits.
You have to let him answer.
Jill, you can claim it on future income. We're looking at the reimbursable option. It's very expensive.
About time.
What's important is that whatever we do.
So you're admitting you didn't get that.
Let me get in here. Asked and answered. Let's go in here. Ms. May, are the jobs gone, or might they come back?
We need to bring the manufacturing sector back. We need to bring the pulp and paper sector back. We need to bring back jobs that are across the country. It's not good enough for people in Nova Scotia to know they can get a job if the family's prepared to be torn apart while dad goes to work at Fort McMurray for several months. You claim to care about families. Families need jobs in the communities where they live. And a policy that allows the Canadian dollar to rise so fast, that distorts the economy through the growth of the Athabasca tar sands at all costs, that loses us jobs for every industry that relies on exports and for tourism, we need to have the kinds of policies that have a national vision and a national focus. So your government that promises billions of dollars for Coast Guard vessels should build them in Canada to create jobs here. It is false economics to try to save money by building those ships in South Korea rather than giving people jobs here at home.
Monsieur Layton, then Monsieur Dion.
Absolutely, and not only that, but we shouldn't be shipping raw logs off to other countries. I can't think of anything they make with wood that we couldn't make here, but you have absolutely no plan to make sure that happens. So our forests are disappearing and going elsewhere, and then we have to buy the products back. Similarly with our auto sector. 5 years ago, we proposed a strategy for producing green cars here in Canada. We didn't get any action from the previous government. We certainly got no action from your government. We could have been in the forefront of this area, but it's this hands-off attitude. And let's remember where most of your tax cuts are going. You admitted they're $50 billion. They're going to banks and oil companies. They're the ones that are ripping off the typical Canadian each and every day at the pump and at the bank
Mr. Layton,
machine.
with respect, the question was, are these manufacturing jobs gone?
They are certainly not if we invest and have a strategy to make sure that we're not squandering our natural resources or the talent of our people, such as Mr. Harper's doing.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. Thank you very much. Because it's a very important question. People are watching us and are asking, do they care about our jobs? I care because we have among the most skillful, talented people in the manufacturing sector in the world. And when I was a minister during a decade, I met many countries and counterparts were telling me, don't lose your manufacturing sector because you will weaken your economy. We did this mistake. Kenyans, you're fortunate. Do everything to save it. We have a prime minister over the last 2 years and 2.5 years. Each time we're asking him to do something, he said what he said today. Well, the economy will create jobs elsewhere. We have a plan for the manufacturing sector to invest in it and to attract investments around the world. When you have this laissez-faire approach with Mr. Flaherty, the governors of the United States are everywhere in the world, saying to the world, invest in our state. And Mr. Flaherty said, we are not in the job to choose winners and losers.
In fairness,
I'm sorry.
I have to let him respond first, then we'll come to you. Mr. Harper.
Let's be clear once again. In the United States right now, they are bailing out the banking system because of misregulation. We're not doing that in Canada. What we're doing in Canada is we're investing. We have the largest national infrastructure investments in this country's history, including just extending the gas tax transfer. We are investing in individual sectors. We've special investments for the forestry sector, for the automobile sector, for the aerospace sector, special incentives for manufacturing. This is hardly a laissez-faire attitude. This is a government that is making the very specific, we're already doing the very specific things you're saying we should be doing. That's why your only
just to follow up here,
the only additional idea is a new carbon.
Follow up, please. Follow up. Are your policies working? Are your policies working?
Look, I would say that overall we're being successful. We're keeping the economy on course. We're not going into a recession. We have a slowdown. We are concerned about the ongoing job losses of manufacturing, and we're obviously looking at some additional ways of trying to assist that sector, and that's why we've announced some specific strategic funds. I think there's some areas we can do better, but we are not in the kind of economic crisis we have in the U.S.
You know what's really astonishing? The only party proposing a Buy Canada Act is the Bloc Québécois. To have one like the Buy America Act. It is within the rules of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. It would let Canada the possibility to help the clothing and textile industries for all the uniforms of the RCMP or the armed forces. I mean, that'd be easy to do. That'd help a lot of people in Montreal. I just don't see why you don't do it.
And I thank the Bloc for that initiative, and we fully support the Buy Canadian approach, from everything from ships, which were mentioned, rightly so, right through to all kinds of products. But, you know, I've got to ask you this question from what you just said. We just had the Volvo plant, which builds aerospace equipment, close in Goderich. 500 jobs gone. And those jobs are going elsewhere, partly because of bad trade deals that were signed by previous governments and supported by your party, and partly because the so-called strategies you suggest are in place aren't there. We've proposed a jobs commissioner who would be on the job the moment we heard about the possible plant closing to get to work with a strategy to try to keep it open, make the sorts of steps and initiatives and partnerships that might make things work. It worked in BC under a good NDP government there. We could make it work here.
Ms. May.
We We need a vision for an economy that focuses on what we need nationally. Again, short-term and long-term, not just looking in the rearview mirror. And that kind of vision wants to invest in Canada. I like, a Buy Canada policy makes sense. Even our Defense Department now is contracting out to get cheaper products from China when better quality products for our military are found right here in Canada. What we're seeing right now under your policies, Mr. Harper, is the most profound structural shift in our economy in more than a generation. And it's dangerous because it's unbalanced. And that's what the rest of the world sees. I don't know why you don't see it.
Monsieur Dion, then Mr. Harper.
In order to help our economy, we need to have a plan right now for the difficulties in which we are in the middle and long term. It's what we have, with very strong fiscal discipline to avoid deficit, with investments in R&D, and we will boost the credit on R&D, and it will be refundable in the Liberal plan. We need to help the companies to buy machinery and equipment that will save energy costs for them. We need to invest much more in infrastructure. We need to have a $1 billion investment to attract the investments around the world in our manufacturing sector. There are a lot of things we need to do, and always we need to help our industry to be more energy efficient, to be more profitable.
Mr. Harper.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, in terms of Coast Guard, shipping vessels, military procurement, we have either a Buy in Canada policy or an industrial regional benefit policy that ensures benefits in this country. So let's be clear. Let's be clear about that.
Let's be clear about that. Buying buses made in Winnipeg instead of buying buses for the military from the other side of the ocean.
Let's let him finish the answer.
That is, in fact, the policy.
Obviously not working.
Jack, let him finish, please. Let him finish, please.
You mentioned some people have lost some jobs. It's a terrible thing when a family loses jobs. It creates terrible uncertainty. I've been between jobs. I understand that. But what we have to do as leaders is make sure we have a plan to create jobs. And I have to tell you that, I believe all you guys are sincere about what you're saying. But the policies of simply ramping up our spending, increasing our taxes, and possibly going into deficit,
we're not
those
proposing
things,
that.
it's exactly what you're proposing. Those things will not create jobs.
A moment, please.
We are
Yes,
proposing
Mr.
to
Layton.
freeze taxes at the level Paul Martin left them. And what we're saying is start to put some investments in action. You say you've got a plan. Where is it? Where's your platform? Under the sweater? You haven't presented one in this election. I find that shocking. I can't remember in history when that's happened.
We have literally, forgive me for jumping in here, we have literally a minute left in this segment on the economy. And I got to do this. Deficits. Everybody here has pledged never to go into deficit. If this economy starts to go further south, is there anybody here who will really swear that we will never go into deficit? Mr. Harper?
I believe there's every reason we can stay in surplus. That's what we've planned for. I think all the indications, we continue to be on track fiscally. I think we'll stay on track.
Okay, Ms. May?
You have to say you have every intention of not reaching a deficit. No one could make that promise. But I have to know, Mr. Harper, how it is that your Minister of Public Works, Mr. Paradis, could say that he's canceling all the contracts to build those ships for the Coast Guard and the Navy and looking at buying them overseas. That's what he announced.
Okay, let me get back on the deficit question.
So we've got some difference between you and your Minister
Mr.
of
Dion,
Public
over here,
Works.
please.
Well, the Liberal government get rid of the mess the Conservatives did, $42 billion deficit, and we had surpluses, and we had a $3 billion of buffer, the contingency reserve that Mr. Harper shamefully abandoned. We'll bring it back. Also, we'll not raise taxes. This is not the truth. You're not saying the truth. We'll, in fact, decrease taxes on what is creating the wealth in this country,
okay,
and instead shift it to pollution.
Mr. Layton, on the issue of a deficit, the NDP would not bring in a deficit?
No, we would not. And in fact, the previous government, of course, loaded it onto the provinces and the municipalities, which I know well because I spent time there. No. And the NDP has the best record in power, according to the Department of Finance, of balancing budgets when we're in power, and that doesn't include Tommy Douglas's 17 balanced budget in a row. Of course, Mr. Ray is now with you, Mr. Dion.
Gilles Duceppe.
We were the only party to propose the anti-deficit law in Ottawa. It was beaten by the older parties. But I'll tell you something, there's a margin of maneuver, and it's very clear in our platform, and we were always accurate on the amount of deficit or surpluses in Ottawa. In fact, the only party to really come to the target when the announcements were made after.
Okay, that's going to end the first segment of our discussion tonight. Now we go to question 2. It comes to us from Toronto, and Monsieur Dion, you'll have the first chance to answer. Roll tape, please.
How do you reconcile the advancement of environmental protection legislation with Canadians' desire to have a growing, sustainable, and stable economy that features less taxation for the already overburdened taxpayer?
Thank you, Mr. Volte. In fact, you are asking one of the key questions of the century, because the difficulty in which we are is the cost of fossil fuels. That means oil and gas. It will continue to grow, and the cost will be environmental and economic. The countries that will have energy efficiency, that will be able to produce more and using less fossil fuels, will be the more competitive of the world. All the Liberal plan is about that. All the Liberal plan is to decrease the taxes on what creates the wealth, your income, your savings, your investments, the profits of companies, and to shift it to pollution and to invest in everything, machinery and equipment, all the solutions, technologies that will make our country cleaner, more energy efficient, and more profitable for the workers and their families.
Stephen Harper.
Yeah, if I can just be clear about the Liberal plan. The carbon taxes proposed in the Liberal plan, you can look at it's page 78 in French, I'm not sure the English, has carbon tax increases double the size of any tax reductions. That's the reality, a tax increase. Look, there's no way, you've got to be honest with the people that some of the environmental things we're going to do are going to impose some costs on the economy. So we have to figure a way that we can balance that, and that's what we're trying to do. We have a greenhouse gas reduction plan that foresees a 20% cut of greenhouse gas emissions from now to 2020. That's less than some of the other parties are proposing, but that's because we're trying to balance economic growth with environmental investment. We're also investing in environmental enforcement. We have to make sure that our economy and our environment are in balance.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Mr. Layton.
Well, first of all, it's vital that we move on these environmental critical issues like climate change. But what we see from the government that we have at the moment is an unwillingness to act. This is a figment of Mr. Harper's imagination, that there's going to be a reduction in emissions from his plan. No one else agrees with this, and it simply won't happen. And in fact, it's a lost opportunity, because what we should be doing is making those big polluters pay with the proposal we've put forward, with strict limits on emissions, and use every penny of those revenues to then stimulate the new industrial sector, the new energy economy, renewable energy, public transportation, green cars, energy efficiency. That's the way forward, and it creates a lot of jobs.
Monsieur Duceppe.
Well, I think it's a very important question, and the answer is to apply Kyoto. Applying Kyoto means choosing 1990 as the year of reference, first. Secondly, to have absolute target, not intensity target like Harper's proposing. Third, to have a real carbon market exchange. And fourth, to have the territorial approach, which means each province will apply its own plan. And I'm very happy that both the Liberal and the NDP supported the territorial approach. For Quebec, it means profit, because we reduced by 1.2% our green gases emissions from 1990 to 2006. During the same time, Alberta raised its own emissions by 36.6% and Saskatchewan by 63%. So those who pollute have to pay.
Thank you, Mr. Duceppe. Elizabeth May.
We need to turn around the preoccupation with acting on climate change as though it threatens economic disaster and face what it really is. As former President Bill Clinton puts it, the climate crisis represents the single biggest economic opportunity in the history of humanity to seize the new technologies that make sense, to start building them here instead of importing them from countries that were ahead of us, to start recognizing that it's simply bad economics to assume that dumping pollution in the atmosphere is free, but stopping that pollution from happening has to cost. It's the other way around. So when we shift and tax those things that we don't want, like pollution, and don't tax the things we want, like income and jobs, we can move in the direction of Sweden, which has actually seen its economy grow while reducing its greenhouse gases, or Germany, that's created 400,000 new jobs in renewable energy.
Okay, that's our time on that one. We have time for open discussion now. Mr. Harper, I want to start with you. You have told us during the course of the campaign that you believe the Liberal plan will raise taxes. You never say, though, that they also have planned tax cuts in the plan as well. Would you acknowledge there are tax cuts included in the Green Shift?
Absolutely, but I encourage viewers to look at the actual table in the Liberal plan, which makes clear that the tax increases are twice the size of the tax reductions. That's why the package would be a tax increase.
It's a lie.
You have $40 billion in carbon taxes and $26 billion in cuts, and you have $12 billion where you don't even have a source of revenue for your spending.
No. Okay, I know the game you're playing. It's not true at all. For every dollar that we will raise, you will have a tax cut, and these tax cuts will be on your income. For a family, earning $60,000, it's $1,300 of tax cut. For a family in poverty, earning only $20,000 with 2 kids, you will have $2,400 back in your pocket, thanks to the green shift. Countries that have done that, contrary to what Mr. Harper wants you to believe, they outperform the countries that did not do it according to the growth of their economy. And at the same time, they take care of the climate change crisis and they think about their children. Don't believe this man. Don't need this kind of leaders anymore.
Ms. May, Mr. Duceppe.
Yeah, I've got to say that the only way that a carbon tax shift works, the way applied in Sweden, the way applied in Germany, the way we propose it in the Green Party, is that you reduce the taxes on the things you want in society, jobs and income, and put them onto pollution. Now, we've got a plan that would bring in $35 billion. I know that Mr. Dion's plan is only bringing in $15. So he can reduce taxes $15 billion. We can reduce them $35 billion. It's simply bad economics to pretend that dumping pollution in the atmosphere doesn't have a cost. It does. And your plan based on intensity targets was this very day the Alberta Auditor General Fred Dunn found that the Alberta plan based on intensity targets is simply not worth the money they're spending on it because it will not reduce greenhouse gases, and neither will yours.
Monsieur Duceppe and Mr. Layton.
Yes, I want to ask a very important question for Quebec to Mr. Harper. I was talking about the territorial approach. I know that the NDP and the Liberals supported the territorial approach. I don't know if the Green Party is supporting also the territorial approach.
You want to explain to our viewers?
Territorial approach, it means each province will have its own plan based on the efforts they made between 1990 and 2006.
Okay.
So it means that Quebec, since Quebec reduced its own emissions by 1.2% compared to 36.6 for Alberta or 63% for Saskatchewan, obviously it means profits for Quebec. So I'm asking Mr. Harper, since the two other parties, I don't know, Mme. May, if you supported that, if you're supporting that, but I want to hear Mr. Harper, is he supporting that? Because for Quebec, it means profits. It means a lot of money. It means investment in Quebec. It means a sustainable development economy for Quebec.
Let's get an answer, then we'll go to Mr. Layton.
Very, very simply, if I can just spend a moment on our plan, which is not to impose taxes on people. It is to make companies pay into a technology fund if they don't meet targets. In terms of provinces, we've been very clear. Every province can have its own implementation plan, provided the targets are at least as strong or stronger than the national targets. You can't have a target that's less than the national target.
Not at all. I'm talking about the European approach. Yeah. The European Union had absolute targets for the old Europe, and then they gave each country a target based on what the efforts they made in the past, recognizing the efforts. So those who made the efforts have to receive the benefit. It's quite different.
The efforts made in the past are part of the factors that are considered in the developing of targets.
Okay, thank you. Jack Layton.
Canadians need to know very clearly that you, Mr. Harper, picked an approach to dealing with climate change that comes right out of the playbook of Exxon and George Bush. It's called intensity-based targets, a nice neutral-sounding phrase. You know what it really means? It means that we can, companies like Exxon, who you gave a permit to in a matter of 1 week for a huge development in the tar sands, even though the environmental and health issues weren't dealt with, they can increase by multiple factors the number of barrels that they produce from those tar sands, and as long as they reduce the emissions per barrel a little bit, you're happy. Well, I'll tell you, Canadians aren't happy, next generations aren't happy, and you're throwing away the opportunity to force these companies to pay up for their pollution and create jobs in the new energy economy.
Okay, we go 1, 2, 3.
Well, Mr. Harper has no credible plan on climate change. All the experts who look at it concluded that. So I don't want to waste a lot of time to discuss it. Just want to say that if I want to become Prime Minister of this country, it's because I want Canada to succeed in the 21st century. The climate change crisis is big. The cost of energy, fossil fuels going up is a big challenge. If we act now, if we do the right changes now, we'll succeed in the short term, middle, and long term. If we avoid the issue, as Mr. Harper is proposing to do, I'm very concerned for my country. It's why we need the Liberal plan. Everything we will do will be about providing more energy efficiency for this country.
Mr. Harper, Ms. May.
Let me just be clear about how we're dealing with the tar sands. First of all, in our plan, the toughest targets are on those who have the greatest amount of emissions. It's that simple. But secondly, we have a specific regime for the oil sands and also for coal-fired electricity. They are going to have to meet the requirement or equivalent of carbon capture and storage, which would reduce their emissions upwards of 70%. That's the target. And furthermore, I've said in this campaign, we will prohibit the export of raw bitumen so that companies cannot go around that tough target. That's the reality of our plan.
What's wrong with that?
We have the weakest target of any country in the industrialized world, and we have the shame of being the only country in the world that ratified Kyoto that's chosen to ignore its targets. It's a shameful situation for Canada to know, for Canadian citizens to know, that our government sent our negotiators to UN conferences such as Bali and obstructed progress even more than the Bush administration. We need to look at this issue of Mr. Giuseppe's territoriality. People don't understand quite what that means, but it's a good concept because it means you work together. What we need in Canada is not what's happening now. Just as when George Bush refused to act on Kyoto, your policies have forced provincial levels, municipal levels to try to create a patchwork to make up for the absence of leadership at the federal level. And just as on health care and on any other issue, Canada works better when there's federal leadership within a framework that brings everyone on board to pull in the same direction.
Okay, let's go 1, 2, 3.
I think we have to explain what intensity target, base target are. Let's say it's an oil barrel. Mr. Harper is saying we'll reduce by 10% the pollution. It looks good. What he is not saying is that instead of producing 1 million a day, they'll produce 5 million a day. So it means at the end, more pollution.
Absolutely.
This is what intensity-based target are.
Mr. Layton.
Well, and I have to say, Mr. Harper, you're not really telling the truth about your plan, because you said that new projects would have to be virtually neutral in emissions with this carbon capture and storage. Then why did you turn around and approve, in 1 week after a court said you shouldn't, a big development? In fact, we took the national media and flew over it during this campaign because I didn't think people would believe it. A huge development without any of these kind of conditions. You know, you're missing the point and you're missing the opportunity.
1 minute left
here.
in this segment, and I need Mr.
You could
Dion
be creating
and Mr. Harper.
jobs now in the new energy
We're gonna split
sector,
the time
and you're
here.
refusing.
Mr. Dion, Mr. Harper.
Yes, obviously Mr. Harper's plan has been rejected by everyone. Our plan has been well received by environmentalists and economists for a good reason. We are bringing together our economic, environmental, and social goals. We'll cut the taxes on the activities that are creating the wealth, like income, savings, investment, profits. We'll put the price on pollution, it will be good for the environment, and we'll cut the taxes, especially for middle and low-income Canadians, to have a fairer country. Richer, greener, fairer.
Mr. Harper.
I think I've been very clear about the tough targets that we are putting in place for the oil sands. Let me just mention a couple of other things we're doing on the environment, because I know there are other things that are important. We've signed an important agreement with the Nature Conservancy of Canada to preserve hundreds of thousands of hectares of environmentally sensitive land, mainly near cities. We've expanded our park system. We've protected the Great Bear Rainforest. We've expanded Nahanni. We've created the largest marine park in the world in Lake Superior and a whale sanctuary in Baffin Island. We've got a strong program to deal with indoor air quality, toxic chemicals. I could go through a list. There's a lot of good things that Canada's doing.
That you actually said that's true is the work on national parks. Well done. Everything else is a fraud.
And that's the and you learned how to say that in French last night.
I did. Fraud. Fraud.
Okay, let's go to our third question now. Our third question comes to us from Montreal. It's about health care. Watch the monitors here.
Hello, I live in Quebec, where it's very difficult to find a family doctor or a pediatrician. It actually took about calling 75 places before I could find a pediatrician for my 6-month-old daughter. I'm very concerned about the quality of health care that we as Canadians are receiving. I wanted to ask, do you have any plans to alleviate the doctor shortage in Canada?
Plans to alleviate the doctor shortage in Canada. Mr. Layton, you get the first crack at this one.
Yes, well, first of all, not having a family doctor is one of the most troubling things any family can face, because the health of your family is the most important thing to you, and I think we could all hear it in your comments just now. We've put forward a plan to increase by 50% the number of doctors that we're training in Canada, and by 6,000 a year, the number of nurses that we're training in Canada. And more than that, we're going to forgive their student debts if they'll commit to 10 years in family medicine. And that will mean also that these doctors can go to more remote places across the country where they're desperately needed. But you know what Mr. Harper's choice has been? To give a huge corporate tax cut and then to say that it's up to the provinces to deal with health care. That's not leadership. That's not what we need in a prime minister.
Thank you, Mr. Layton. Gilles Duceppe.
Well, I think, madam, that the problem is we're discussing a health system here while the services are given by provinces. It is a provincial or Quebec jurisdiction. And the problem is Ottawa is not managing or administrating any hospital, the health department in Ottawa. But they're telling provinces and Quebec what to do. I think this is the whole story of Ottawa knows best. Instead of intervening in the provincial matters, they should take care of what they're responsible for, like the Aboriginal conditions, which are awful, health conditions for the Aboriginal people, and food inspection. That'd be the time they take care of what they're responsible of instead of interfering in provincial matter.
Thank you, Mr. Giuseppe. Elizabeth May.
We're now suffering in our healthcare system from a series of decisions that were taken in the early 90s. They had to do with tough deficit cutting. Jack Layton's made this point. It caused serious damage. We lost 21% of our hospital beds between the year 93, 94, 96, 97. And that period of cutting, it actually was interesting, did not result in the savings people thought, because when you don't have the hospital beds and you cut back on the doctors, you have sicker people staying in hospital longer. Our healthcare system needs people who believe in the full public provision of health care for everyone, and we need to reinvest in that. Yes, we need to make sure our doctors don't have student debts. Yes, we need to make sure that doctors and nurses operate in this country and that we have hospital beds to meet that need. It's urgent that we invest, because right now under Chapter 11 of NAFTA, U.S. private interests are trying to break down our system.
That's our time. Monsieur Dion.
Ms. Jacobs, I think about you and 5 million Canadians in the same situation who don't have a family doctor. We need to do something, especially because our doctors and nurses are aging. In fact, the age average of our doctors now is 50 years old. A lot of baby boomers will leave to retirement at a time where our population is aging too and is requesting more care. So we need to act. The federal government must be a partner, yes, respecting the role of provinces. The provinces are asking us to be part of the solution. It's why a Liberal government will indeed invest to have more doctors and nurses, and will work with provinces, with hospitals, and with the Association of Nurses and Doctors to make it through for Canadians.
Stephen Harper.
Well, let me just say, first of all, that what Elizabeth May said is absolutely true, that there were dramatic cuts made by the Liberal government in the 1990s to health care across the country, and also cuts in schools that were producing healthcare professionals, and we are now seeing the consequences of that. What we've been doing is working with the provinces. This is an area where the provinces run the healthcare system and run the hospitals. So our approach as the federal government has not been to attack the provinces. It's been to work with the provinces. We're providing them with records amounts of money. In fact, we're increasing that money far more quickly than any other federal transfer, and we're proposing additional measures we can take to help physician recruitment, to help recruit healthcare professionals, and also to aid in specific areas where the federal government's research responsibilities can be helpful.
Thanks, Mr. Harper. That's time. Okay, Mr. Layton, you wanted to come in.
I find what you're saying, Mr. Harper, to be quite incredulous. Maybe you're hoping that Canadians forget history and the heartless remarks that were made by you and your party members in those times. You're criticizing the Liberals for cutting back in health care. You're right on that. But guess who was urging them to cut back more? Guess who was urging them to privatize the health care system? You led a citizens group that had that as one of its main objectives. And now you want a majority government? I'll tell you one thing. The NDP brought public health care to Canada, and we're not only going to stand and defend it the way Tommy Douglas would want us to, we're going to expand it into pharmacare and home care and training doctors and nurses. And the way we're going to do it is cancel your tax cuts to Exxon.
Mr. Harper, you want to respond to that?
Let me just be very quick on this. I use the public health care system. My family uses the public health care system. In fact, in the last federal election campaign, at one point it turned out I was the only national leader, actually, who had used exclusively the public health care system. So, you know, that's the system we've got to fix for everybody.
Why don't you support
it? That's why we're making important investments.
Can I just understand? That sounded like a shot. What is that a reference to?
Well, my understanding is that other leaders have used private clinics. I've never used a private clinic.
I've never used a private clinic. You live in Canada, right?
Always with the health insurance card.
Always with the health insurance card.
I've never used. I've never used.
One second, hang on.
I've never used a private clinic.
But nonetheless, you're dismantling it.
Can we
and
just
you're taking
explain?
no responsibility for it.
Look, gentlemen, can we just explain what that's a reference to? I think that's a reference to the fact that you once went to the Shouldice Clinic, which is a private clinic, but the services services are covered by OHIP.
Part of OHIP.
The health insurance plan.
You take out your health card. It's a cheap shot, and it's not only that. Talk to Tommy Douglas's daughter about whether it's part of Medicare, and she'll tell you.
A cheap shot. You just accused me of wanting to destroy the healthcare system in this country.
Hang on, let him finish.
Our party has been committed strongly to a system of universal public health insurance in the country. That's why we created, for instance, in budget in 2007, an additional $1 billion fund, $600 million for wait time guarantees, another $400 million to help fund the Canada Health Infoway. In this country, we don't have permanent electronic patient records. That's one of the reasons we can't manage our waiting list properly. So these are investments we're making.
Aren't you standing up to the privatization that's happening now, the for-profit medicine that's taking money away from doctors' and nurses' salaries and putting it into the pockets of corporations who want to come here and make money off health?
Got to manage the time a little better here. Monsieur Dion, you wanted in.
The truth is that without a liberal government in the 90s, we would have had a conservative government who would not have health care anymore with the kind of ideology they had at that time. We saved health care and we put that on good footing, and we were ready to invest in 2006, and Mr. Harper and his party did almost nothing during that time. And the waiting list, it's a broken promise. You did not solve it. And we'll have a lot of difficulties to solve it if we don't answer to the questions of Madame Jacobs, and if we don't increase the number of doctors and nurses in Canada. This is key for the success of our country, and I have other ideas too, and I will have time.
Ms. May.
I'm sorry this discussion seems to be taking place in a level of complete naivete about the pressures that exist globally to destroy our healthcare system. We have to be aware of them. We have to know them. The International Monetary Fund reported to Canada about our deficits in 93 and 94 that if we were going to be able to maintain our credit rating, we had to cut our hospital beds. That was in fact done by provinces and federal government in an invisible way that Canadians didn't see. Now we have NAFTA, Chapter 11, a suit filed by an Arizona businessman just recently to claim the right to move in to build a private clinic in Canada, because what to us is a sacred trust, a universal health care system. To the U.S., big business and very, very expensive and very poor health care system, we are a market. We have to recognize that, yes, the liberal cuts in the 90s hurt our health care system. Yes, we're seeing further pressure on our health care system. And yes, Mr. Harper, your job from 97 until you went back into politics was to destroy our health care system. You gave speeches in which you told Americans we were a failed Northern European welfare state, and proof of our inferiority was our pride in our health care system. You said that many times.
Okay, Ms. May, can I just clarify? If it's a private clinic, but the services are covered by the provincial health insurance plan, are the Greens okay with that?
No, we need to see full protection of our public health care system. As it erodes, we run the risk, as we've thrown it out in our document Vision Green, and it's now happening, the risk under Chapter 11 of U.S. for-profit medicine coming into this country are simply too great.
So would you nationalize all private clinics?
We would need to make sure that the Canadian Health Care Act is fully enforced, and provinces should do so.
But that's not answering my question. Would you nationalize all existing private clinics?
We need to ensure the Health Care Act is enforced fully, and that's not a question of nationalizing. That's a question of living up to our legislation.
Mr. Duceppe, Mr. Dion.
I think it's an odd discussion here because it depends. It's on provincial jurisdiction. And it's always the same story in Ottawa. When the federal has money, they're intervening in those jurisdictions. When they want to cut, they're getting their money back, but the needs are still there. And the provinces are facing huge challenges like it happens under the Liberals. And instead of settling for once the fiscal imbalance, which is not settled, as Mr. Charest, Madame Marois, and Mr. Dumont are saying, we have to go like that instead of intervening when you got money, withdrawing what you don't have, because the needs are there, and there more and more need with the aging population.
Okay, I got to go 1, 2, 3.
There is a way for the federal government to be involved without infringement with provinces, and it's what we will do. Another example is catastrophic drugs coverage. More and more in Canada, you will receive your cure outside of the hospitals where the government pays, at home, where many times the plan is not covering the drug that you have to pay, and it's maybe very expensive, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I don't want to be in a country where people have to sell their house to pay for their medication. It's why we will have the federal government partner with the provinces for catastrophic drug drugs.
Mr. Harper.
Yeah, if I could just be clear on how the Canada Health Act works. Any facility that is providing publicly insured services must provide those equally to everybody. And that's a principle that all governments in this country, including the government of Quebec, subscribe to. And that is a core principle that we defend. Now, let me just talk about a couple of things we do above and beyond that. We do have some unique federal responsibilities. We have special roles in research. That's why we created, for instance, the National Cancer Strategy. It's why we created the Mental Health Commission of Canada, where the federal government can work with professionals and work with others who are involved in the research side of Medicare, and often in cooperation with the provinces on delivery.
Last word on health to Mr. Layton, then we've got to go on.
You certainly left the health of Aboriginals untouched, and that's a critical area where we need action. And, you know, we heard at the beginning of this about the need for family doctors. And the other need, as Mr. Dion mentioned, is for coverage for medications your doctor says you need. Time and time again, people will tell me they can't afford that, and it breaks their heart. Of course, we heard the same promise from you, Mr. Dion, or your predecessor in 1997. 11 years ago, they said they'd bring in pharmacare. It never happened. We're proposing that, and the way we propose to pay for it is rolling back these huge tax reductions proposed by Mr. Harper, freezing the tax level so we can afford health care. It's a question of priorities for our Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Layton. All right, we've heard a question from Calgary, Toronto, Montreal. The next one is coming from Saskatchewan. This one is about the arts. Watch the monitor here in the studio. Roll tape, please.
Greetings from the prairies. I'm an artist. I have friends who are artists, and we would like to know what the arts means to each of you and what kind of funding there will be in your budgets.
Arts. Monsieur Duceppe, you get the first shot at this one.
Yes, it means a lot to me. My father was a well-known comedian, I think. My family has a theater in Montreal. My son and my daughter are working in the movie sector. So I would say that I know pretty well the situation there. And I thought it was awful for Mr. Harper to make those cuts in the cultural sector. How could you recognize the Quebec nation and then cut culture, which is the soul of a nation? And it is also economically very important. It means, if we believe in the conference board, 8% of the gross national product, $85 million, 314,000 jobs in Quebec only.
Okay, Monsieur Duceppe, we'll get into it more, I'm sure, during the discussion period. Ms. May, you get the next one.
Arts and culture are an essential part of a democracy. Free ability for expression, not having the support for the arts tied to an ability of government to censor what projects they like, what projects they don't. We believe that, as in the recent theories of Richard Florida, there's such a thing as a creative class. And the creative class leads to investment, leads to greater economic activity, leads to community health. So yes, it's important. It's an important industrial, it's an important economic sector to have filmmaking, to have dance and performance arts, to have our theater companies able to travel around the world. This is all critical. But arts and culture are also an essential part of who we are. And as we are overwhelmed by Hollywood and culture from the United States, we need to protect our identity as Canadians, our separate identities, our individual identities, our Canadian identity.
That's time. Monsieur Dion.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Potter, because I share completely your view how much arts and culture are important. First, it's fun. It's bringing us beauty, emotions, a beautiful novel, a beautiful movie. We need to have more of that, certainly. Second, it's a way to be stimulated. Not all of us are artists, but all of us benefit from it. The country is stimulated by his and her artists. Third, it's a lot of money. It's a big industry, and the return to investment for government is great. So it's a mistake to invest in it only when the economy is going well and to think it's a luxury. In fact, it's a stimulation for the economy. Finally, it's our identity. It's what we are. It's why we Liberals will invest in our arts and culture.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dion. Mr. Harper, you get the next one.
I was asked a little bit about what arts means to us. I enjoy the arts immensely. I play a little bit of piano, although I wouldn't call myself terribly proficient. I come from a family on my father's side where there was a little bit of musical talent. My wife's family, a very artistic family. They paint, they draw, they have tremendous artistic abilities. My daughter has a little bit of that artistic flair for design. She's in dance. My son is learning guitar. One of the things we want to do, we've increased the arts and culture budget in this country. But one of the things we do want to do, one of the things I've announced in this election, is we're going to create a $500 tax credit for every child, so that parents can get a tax credit if they enroll their kids in artistic or cultural activities, and that should help really sustain and develop the cultural life of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Mr. Layton.
Well, the arts is very important to Olivia and I. She's a sculptor. I'm not particularly talented in any of these fields, but I enjoy the arts, and they're part of our soul. You know what's ironic about what Mr. Harper just said? He's going to give a tax credit. Most people in the arts wouldn't be able to afford to send their kids to piano lessons. The average salary of the thousands of people who work in the arts runs from $10,000 to $12,000 a year. They're some of the poorest workers we have. And you're proposing cuts there. You've increased the budget by moving the money somewhere else. What we say, it's time to give working artists a decent standard of living and make the first $20,000 of what they earn residuals tax-free and provide some assistance to them in the tax system. Let's support the arts and their workers and their families in a real way, for heaven's sakes.
That's our time on the 45-second discussion. So I want to ask a bit of an odd question here, and I will get to you, Monsieur Duceppe. Much of the reaction to his government's decision to cut the arts has resulted in a real pile-on from the other four of you. And I want to know whether you think conservatives are barbarians. Simple as that. Monsieur Dion.
Hey, hang on a second.
Hang on. Let's go. Monsieur Dion.
I will choose my words. I think Mr. Harper consider our artists as enemies when they are our inspiration. It's what you have done, Mr. Harper. In fact, it's not only the cuts, it's the fact that the way it has been announced, a Friday afternoon with the internet, hoping that people will not take notice of it. And it has been announced after by your spokesperson, not by the minister, as if we were in the United States, President Stephen Harper. And also it has not been justified by some management. You didn't say these programs were poorly managed. You said we don't like these artists. They are not enough mainstream to our taste. It's not the job of politicians to choose who will be held by the government. We are not in big border territory.
Okay, Monsieur Duceppe and Mr. Harper gets a response.
I think the real answer came from Jim Flaherty, the Minister of Finance. He said, we're a conservative government. When we're at the cabinet table, we're making decisions with our conservative hat, which means it was not an economic decision, it was an ideological decision.
And you think he hates the arts?
I'm saying is it doesn't stand for him at a certain moral standard he has. And I think that we shouldn't play with that when we're financing the art sector. And when Mr. Harper is saying that the Canadian Heritage budget was raised, was true, by 8%, what it was raised, that's true. But the part of culture within that department was reduced by 8%. So between 2006 and 2009, you're minus 27 million before the cuts in the cultural sector.
Okay, let's give him a chance to respond.
Well, that's simply not true. The budget for arts and culture in this country has gone up. We've looked at, as we've done in every department, it's a responsibility of the government, we've looked at all the programs, and we've reallocated to programs that are more effective and away from ones that are not. We've increased funds to the Canadian Council of the Arts. We increased funds to museums, to festivals, actually to CBC, some may be surprised. The specific programs we abolished, even the artistic director of Cavalier in Montreal admitted when he looked at the actual things we cut is because these were programs that were no longer effective. That's why we switched, that's why we've moved the funding to things that are more effective. And that's a responsibility a government has to manage money during difficult times in every area of government.
Ms. May, Mr. Layton.
Mr. Harper's decision to kill arts funding in 16 different programs, including such things as having climate-controlled trucks that can deliver exhibits from gallery to gallery and museum to museum, simply something that individual galleries will no longer be able to do because of your cuts. Tiny amounts of money, and yet targeted for cuts. So no, Mr. Paikin, I don't think they're barbarians. I don't think Mr. Harper personally hates the arts, nor do I think he personally supports the arts. But he has appropriated all the levers of government to one sole end, increasing his political electoral power. And he goes through this process, as your conservative war room has has a database that knows more about the individual Canadian voter than any prime minister or political party leader ever has, and for some reason, your tacticians and strategists have decided that these mean-spirited cuts against artists will help win you votes, and that's the whole reason for these stupid cuts.
Let's go 1, 2, 3.
I have two views on two comments to make about the approach of Conservatives. First, they talk about freedom as though it's one of those values. But, Mr. Harper, when it comes down to it, you're trying to censor and limit the freedom of expression in this country, particularly of those who criticize.
How's he trying to do that?
Well, just look at the kind of programs that get cut. I mean, they're the ones that take controversial ideas forward. They're the ones that get nicked first. And that's simply wrong. And I'd say to you, the second one.
Let's have an example of that.
Well, the foreign promotion of small and independent films coming out of Canada. Why would you cut that?
You're saying we cut those based on the film?
Well, the memos that came out of your political offices mentioned names like Gwynne Dyer and Avi Lewis as reasons that programs were cut.
Okay,
so
Ms.
if you
May,
want to deny those motivations,
hang on, hang on, guys, I'm trying to make sure that Biden and Palin don't take our audience here, so let's go over here to Dion.
Thank you. Well, it's clear that it has been ideological cuts. It has been justified this way. Never your government provided the assessment of the bureaucrats, the civil servants, showing that these programs were not working. It's ideological, and your spokesperson and your Minister of Finance said so. We just wanted to say, we had the plan in 2006 to double the budget of the Arts Council. They canceled it. We'll do it. When we will increase the tax credit for movies, we'll have more movies, more novels, more theaters, more fun in Canada.
One thing Mr. Harper said was very important. He said we considered those programs were not efficient. But we asked this government to show the analysis they made. We had a committee, and they refused to show those analyses. If they were not efficient, why didn't you show those analyses you made? It was the best proof.
Well,
was the best proof. Why did you refuse?
Take a look at even what the artistic director of Cavalier and others have said, who've actually looked at these programs. We've increased in areas, increased in the CBC, increased in TV5, increased in festivals, increased in the Canada Council for the Arts, increased in museums. There's no ideological agenda there.
You're getting a bad rap?
Absolutely, we're getting a bad rap. What we're doing here is what we have to do in every area of government. We have to constantly, we have an expenditure management program. We evaluate over a 5-year period every department of government. We make sure that we're focusing more dollars in things that are working well and less dollars in things that aren't.
All right, let me put that to Mr. Layton. Hang on a second. No, you've had a good turn. I have to go to Mr. Layton. Got to manage the time here.
Good idea to review.
No, but hang on. Is he a good idea to review?
Good idea to review programs. They should always be reviewed.
Arts programs are not sacrosanct. Then they're on the block like everything else. They have to justify their existence.
But let's take the following key point into consideration. In our competitors' world, they are investing in the arts because they understand that there's a huge job creation that flows from that. We should be doing the same here. I represent the film district in Toronto. That's where the films are made. There are 5,000 people in my riding alone who derive their living from this, making costumes and doing lighting and carpenters and sets and even restaurants that cater. And so you get more leverage per dollar here than in just about any industry. So I don't know why you don't make it a central part of your economic strategy. You'd rather give the money to banks. I don't think the banks need it. In fact, in the financial sector, we've seen a loss of employment while we give them their tax cuts. That makes no sense.
And that, Mr. Layton's got to be the last word on this one on the arts. We thank our friend from Saskatchewan for sending that question in. The next one, you are good. All right. Next question coming from Markham, Ontario. It's about crime. Let's watch.
Good evening. Every day I watch the news and I see the terrible increase in the rate of violent crime. What do your respective parties plan to do about this terrible situation, which has gone way out of hand?
The rate of violent crime. And Ms. May, you get the first chance to answer this one.
Well, it's somewhat deceptive because the rate of violent crime is not actually going up. News coverage of specific and quite horrific events tend to take a lot of attention, and that's the nature of news media and coverage. Still, we want Canadians to be secure in their homes. So our approach is that we draw a line in the sand and know that when you cross that line and commit a violent crime, the instructions to judges, the bail conditions become stricter, that we actually know what we're doing with people who have been committed a violent have committed a violent crime, we also need to ban handguns. We need to ban semi-automatic weapons. We need to get those weapons off our streets. And we also need to recognize that rural Canadians and Indigenous people who use hunting rifles need to have a less complex, less burdensome financial system for their regulation of their control of their weapons.
Thanks, Ms. May. Monsieur Dion, you're next.
Well, Mr. Taver, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I understand how you feel. It's true that the number of crimes is decreasing in Canada, but behind each crime, there is a human tragedy. And it's the responsibility of the government to have the best policies to decrease crime and to make our country safer every year after year after year. For that, we need to choose a good approach. Yes, to have meaningful sentencing when the law is broken, but also to fight the cause of crime, to be tough on crime and to be tough on the causes of crime, like poverty, for instance, addiction, mental illness. We need to take care of that. We need to have prevention, and we need to help the police to protect ourselves, to give them the tools they need. And it's what we'll do as a Liberal government.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dion. Mr. Harper, you get it next.
Yeah, there are some disturbing increases in some types of crime in some parts of the country. All through the country, we see an increase in crime related to the confluence of gangs, guns, and drugs, and that is something that we have to deal with. We made it clear we'll bring in tougher sentencing provisions for those young offenders who are involved in those kinds of very dangerous activities, particularly in a repeat way. We've also said we'll do things about preventing crime. We'll put additional funding into trying to draw youth away, into assisting youth who are at risk of being drawn into gang criminal activity. There's a disturbing increase in property crime in some parts of this country as well, and we're talking about additional measures to strengthen sentence there. But our measures are targeted at the very real crime problems we're seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Jack Layton.
Well, what Samir, you mentioned is something that so many communities are grappling with. In my own riding, just in the last short period of time, 3 people were killed by stray bullets from guns fired off by gangs in the streets of downtown Toronto. And this is happening far too often across the country. So it's time to give our communities and our provinces the power, as we propose, to ban those handguns off those streets, because there's no reason for a handgun on the street of a city except in the hands of a law enforcement officer. And the semi-automatic weapons need to be dealt with severely as well. We need strong laws, but we've got to invest also in solutions, for example, for young people. Mr. Harper promised $50 million to deal with youth programs, and he didn't deliver on it, and he's promising it again.
Thank you, Mr. Layton. We'll get into this some more, I'm sure, during the discussion. Monsieur Doucette.
Yes, I think it's right that the crime rate is decreasing in Canada, especially in Quebec. I think Quebec has the best record of all provinces, especially with young offender. That doesn't mean there's no problem, and I think Mr. Dion was right on that. But I think the Harper's government is not having having the right targets. I would say that instead of punishing young people, young offenders, by putting them in jail, we have to look for a better education for them. And we have to hit the armed criminals. And the Bloc was the party which proposed the anti-gang law, and we're proposing tough measures for the real criminals. And we have to think to the victims also. I don't see why you didn't answer the proposals we made concerning employment insurance and employment status for
Thank you, Mr. Doucette. Okay, that's 45 seconds. Okay, Ms. May, I saw your hand up. You want to follow up?
I want to share with you an inspiring story. There's an RCMP officer, John Kennedy, in my community, who noticed that when he was taking the statements from young offenders, he found quite often he had to write them out for them because they just weren't really functionally literate. He's now able to work full-time in an adopt-a-library program because he believes, and he's proving it, that literacy is an essential element in keeping kids out of crime. So I think we need to recognize that there are good ways to invest in our society, and that it was really, again, unfortunate and shameful that Mr. Harper's government killed $17 million in literacy programs. But let's look at what works. It's investing in our kids when they're young.
I have to let him respond to that. Mr.
Well,
Harper?
let me be clear. We didn't cut literacy. What we cut was a program that didn't actually teach people to read. That's why we cut the program. Of course, we're investing in actual literacy programs. And of course, we have to invest in programs that address people who have troubled lives and who are at risk of getting involved in crime. But where we differ with the other parties is when it comes to serious, repeat, and violent crime, there have to be serious penalties. That's a fundamental difference between our party and the other parties. It's why we've proposed to end house arrest for a whole range of very serious property crimes, and why we've proposed that those young offenders who are involved in murder, in violent sexual assault, and in particularly in repeat cases of this, face appropriate sentences.
Jack Layton.
You know what's interesting, Mr. Harper, because some of the measures that you're mentioning here, and we supported some of those measures, they were already through the House of Commons this time last year. And you decided to prorogue because you wanted to give a speech. And those bills fell by the wayside as a result. So it's pretty hard, really, to believe you on this stuff when you play political games. But I have to come back to the importance of young people and giving them a good start in life. And again, you made a promise and you didn't deliver on that last time. You're making the same promise this time. We propose to give families with kids $400, up to $400 per child per year, so that families, especially poor families, can get the right start in life. That's how we're going to begin to reduce crime in this country and deal with the poverty issues that oftentimes underlie it.
Stéphane Dion.
Yes, I trust judges and you don't. This is the difference. It's not that you're tougher on crime, it's that you want to deprive judges to judge. And you want the politicians to decide things like, for instance, to send a child, 14-year-old, away for life. And you suggested that Judge Nunn from Nova Scotia was supporting it, and he said, no, you're going too far, Mr. Harper. It's what he said and what I'm telling you. It will not help our country to be safer. Your idea to get rid of house arrest for somebody who would steal, for instance, mail at the mailbox, well, it's certainly a crime. You need to have a sentence. But house arrest may be something a judge may decide to do, instead to expose this person to criminals that are much more serious, because then the risk that this person will become more dangerous for society will be...
Let me response to Mr. Harper, because on both things you're wrong. First of all, what we propose on young offenders is actually to give judges this additional ability to have tougher sentences in the extreme and violent cases. That's precisely what the proposal of my party is in this election. And on house arrest, we have 40% in some parts of the country, 40% under those under house arrest violate the conditions of their house arrest. This is a policy that is spun out of control, and that's why we see rings of property crime expanding in some parts of the country. That's precisely why we have to take some action to deal with that.
Do you want a quick response on his allegation that you don't trust judges?
Well, I say on this particular case, it's actually the judges that we're giving additional discretion to.
So do you want to re-evaluate his lack of trust in judges?
There is nobody who's supporting to go so far. And to give
what you're saying is the judges shouldn't, in fact, have that ability, and we don't agree with you. We don't agree with you.
Have not heard from Mr. Duceppe, and then we'll go to Ms. May.
When we had that debate under the Liberal at first, then with your government, everybody in Quebec, the judges, the lawyers, the policemen, the experts, they all say, well, we have a different system in Quebec. It works pretty well, and we don't need that kind of, I would say, philosophy imported from the United States. More arms in circulation, more people in prison. I don't think it's corresponding to what we are, what we're developing. And in Quebec, this is the place in North America where there's less violence.
Let's go to Ms. May.
Prescribing minimum sentences has been shown throughout the world as something that simply doesn't work. It doesn't deter crime. It just tends to add to the burden on other levels of government. The cost of your crime package already passed on the government of British Columbia alone is an additional $22 million because you do not want to let the judges determine those sentences. The current Young Offenders Act does allow judges to decide that a crime is sufficiently serious that a young person would face the kind of sentence if they had been an adult, but they don't get put into the same kind of facilities as hardened criminals who are adults. You need to treat young people differently. We don't let them vote yet. We don't let them drive yet. You want to put them in jail with adults. It's simply not right.
Jack Layton,
you know, there's just a dimension that should be in this national debate, and that is the shameful percentage of First Nations and Inuit and Métis young people that are in our jails right now. And why is that? If you've been to their communities, you know, Prime Minister, what I'm talking about. 4 families jammed into a house built for 1. 18 kids sleeping in shifts in beds. I've literally seen this happen. No school to go to, even when they were promised by your government. Water they can't drink. Food that's so expensive they can't feed their kids properly. And how are they going to make their way? They find themselves in trouble. That is a national disgrace. We need to see action on these
Let's
issues.
just clarify. Is that all his fault? Let's clarify.
Look, it goes back. I won't deny it. But I'm saying that all of us around this table have got to start to do better. We participated in an important apology. But an apology only means something.
I got a minute left in
if
the
you
segment.
get something done and deliver on change.
30 here, 30 here. Last minute.
Look, I could talk very quickly, and I won't try about the things we've done to address some of those specific problems you've talked about. But there is a disconnect here. The reality is the police, the victims groups, and people across this country see day in and day out terrible violent crimes that are committed and sentences that are just not sufficient, and terrible violent criminals that are back on the street in all too short order. And we all know that's happening. The police and the victims group in Quebec equally know that's what's happening, and that's why they're supporting the kind of changes we make, because we need as much compassion for victims in this country as we have for criminals.
Monsieur Dion.
Yes, we need, but we don't need to have a system that failed in the United States and that you want to import in Canada that will increase incarceration rate but not make our country safer. We need to continue the liberal approach that help us to have the crime going down year after year after year. About Aboriginals, we had the Kelowna Accord that was supported by the Aboriginal organizations of our country, all the provinces and territories. Mr. Layton, you come with a coalition with Mr. Harper to kill the Kelowna Accord. We never had that. We'll have that when we'll be back as a government.
Simply not true.
Yes, it's what you did.
And you've supported Mr. Harper 43 times. His policies, your responsibility. Start to realize the responsibility of your own party and you as leader of the opposition to keep Mr. Harper in power for so long. I don't think if you can't do your job as leader of the opposition, I don't know what you're doing running for Prime Minister.
You had a coalition with him in order to kill the Accord.
Let him respond.
And I will just, okay, thank you very much.
Let you respond.
Thank you very much. 14th of October, Canadians have an opportunity to have the Kelowna Accord back. And this will be done only if we have a Liberal government. This is what the issue is.
Funded it fully according to the AFN.
That is the last word in this segment. That's the last word in this segment, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go on now and talk about Afghanistan. Kitchener, Ontario, come on in with your question. Roll tape, please.
Good evening. I'm an Afghan Canadian. My question is to Mr. Harper. How would you justify to other NATO countries, the people of Afghanistan, the Canadian families who have lost their loved ones, that pulling the troops out of Afghanistan in 2011, while Taliban have continuously been exhibiting reorganization, strength, and ruthlessness, is the best Canada could do to continue to take on its internationally military responsibility? Thank you.
Okay, question referring to the deadline of 2011 when Canada says it will take its troops out. Mr. Harper,
that's a very good question. 2011 is 3 more years off. By then, Canada will have been in Afghanistan for nearly 10 years in a military capacity. We will have been in Kandahar for 6 years. It's our strong belief. We had a parliamentary resolution to authorize this involvement to a particular point in time. I think that's wise. One of the things I disagree with some other Western leaders is that our plan can be somehow to stay in Afghanistan militarily indefinitely. If we are to truly pacify that country and see its evolution, we have to train the Afghan army and police so that they are credibly able to take greater responsibility for their own security. I've discussed this with President Karzai. He agrees. That's what we should be aiming for, and we won't achieve such a target unless we actually set a deadline and work to meet it.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Jack Layton, you're next.
Well, thank you for the question. And no soldier that goes and serves this country, risking life, ever serves in vain, because we parliamentarians have asked you to perform that role. Now, our party was the only party to step forward from the outset and on every occasion say that there should not be an extension of the mission, because we don't believe that we're on the right path. All of the indications are that it's a less safe place. There's more drug production, there's more corruption, more civilian death, and more soldiers' deaths. Canada's voice should be a voice for peace, and we should go to the UN after we withdraw our troops and engage in a comprehensive peace process. Even President Karzai is recommending it now.
Thank you, Mr. Layton. That's your time. Gilles Duceppe, you're next.
Yes, first of all, I think that when Jack Layton's saying that he's the only party who was coherent on that question, I would say that in May 2007, if he had voted with the Liberals and us, that mission would be coming to an end by next February in 4 months. That's a matter of fact. Having said that, I think that this is not a balanced mission. We need to put more money for humanitarian aid compared to the money we're investing for military purposes. And I think we have to come with more collaboration with other countries in a larger peace plan for Middle East, including Afghanistan, because even if it's not in Middle East, it's part of the problem, a larger problem.
Thank you. That's your time. Elizabeth May.
The situation of Afghanistan is simply too important to deal with in a history-free zone, as Mr. Bush and Mr. Harper have done. When you look at history, you see that when the U.S.-led covert mission destabilized and finally saw the occupying USSR forces withdraw, there was a vacuum, and in that time there was a humanitarian crisis and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. So the Greens come at this with a different approach. What's fair and right for the people of Afghanistan? What will work? The NATO mission isn't working. The bombardment of civilians only turns people to the Taliban. The destruction of the poppy crops only turns people to the Taliban. We need a United Nations mission that is prepared to take on Taliban, but with far more nations involved, many from Islamic backgrounds, and turn those poppies into medicinal drugs for developing countries.
Okay, Ms. May, that's your time. Thank you. Stéphane Dion, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salam. I want to say first I have an admiration, incredible admiration for the courage of men and women in uniform and our civilians risking their life in Afghanistan to help the people of Afghanistan to have a better living and more security. If I thought for a minute that we are there in order to be invaders, I would say we need to pull out right away, because we Canadians always put our troops abroad to help for the cause of peace, security, and democracy. In Afghanistan, we'll do our best until 2011 to provide more security to the people of Afghanistan, to help them to take care of their own country in coalition with our NATO partners. And in 2011, we'll have other responsibilities to do in Darfur or in other countries. It's what we will do with the Liberal government.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dion. Let's get into some discussion about this. And Mr. Harper, I think what's underlying the question here is, how can we leave if the job isn't done? What's the answer to that?
Well, I guess the question is, I guess I would turn it around. If we never leave, will the job ever get done? And look, we can't ourselves pacify Afghanistan. We've got to eventually have Afghans be capable of running their own security. And you know, obviously, we've got a role there. This is a United Nations mission, let's be clear.
No, it isn't.
And people talk about George Bush. This was a mission approved by the United Nations. There are 36 countries militarily involved. There are some 60 partners altogether. We're there as part of an international mission with the support of the democratically elected Afghan government. And yes, we're doing a military mission. We're also doing important development and humanitarian work. Afghanistan is our biggest single recipient of foreign aid by far in this world. So I think it's a mission as balanced as it can be given the conditions we're in Canada.
Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mr. Harper, I don't think at the bottom line you can be trusted on this. I think your views on these matters go back a long way. And they derive from the philosophy emerging from the Bush White House, a philosophy which hopefully will be replaced soon. And I don't think that this is the philosophy that represents the values of Canadians. And I must say, I don't think the Liberals can be trusted on this either, because, Mr. Dion, you committed to 2009 withdrawal, and then it became 2011. How do we know you're not going to change your mind again? So I think if we want a new direction, we need a Prime Minister who makes the commitment and does it in an election. Okay, that will withdraw our troops and start on a process to achieve peace. That's my commitment.
Since you took a shot at him, I got to let him respond to that.
Mr. Layton, I never broke my word. Mr. Harper, what he said, you would have been in complete disagreement with what he said a year ago. A year ago, he was saying we'll stay until the job is not done, and so on. I always said the same thing. If we accepted to go from 2009 to 2011, it's because Mr. Harper prepared nothing for the rotation. Would have left Afghanistan without any preparation. You need to prepare these things. You don't leave Afghanistan as you live a camping. You need to organize that with your allies. It's what I will do. One of the first things I will do as Prime Minister, I will announce to our NATO allies and to the government of Afghanistan that indeed 2011 is a serious end date that we will respect, and we have a mandate for Canadians for that.
Gilles Duceppe, then Elizabeth May.
Yes, I'd like to know, Mr. Harper, if you will admit that if the situation is so tough in Afghanistan, certainly a large part of that is because of the error made by George Bush by going in Iraq. And thus, do you realize today that you were making a huge error by supporting Bush and Australia in a given speech that was deeply inspired? and that was a huge error you made at that time. Would you make the same decision today than you were proposing Canada to do in 2003?
Okay, well, Mr. Harper, then I made it very clear Canada is not going to Iraq. So obviously,
it's not a question I asked.
Obviously, you know the answer to that question. But let's be clear about.
No, I want to hear it.
Let's be clear about Afghanistan.
Did you admit it was an error of George Bush, and you made the same error?
It was absolutely an error.
So you made an error at that time?
It's obviously clear. The evaluation of weapons of mass destruction proves not to be. Not to be correct. That's absolutely true.
So you made an error.
That's why we're not sending anybody to Iraq.
No, we're only not sending anyone to Iraq because you weren't Prime Minister at the time.
On Afghanistan, let's remember, Afghanistan is a mission. It's not a George Bush mission, a mission of the United Nations. In the United States, both parties, Senator Obama is committed to increase. Senator Obama has committed to increase American commitment to Afghanistan.
I didn't say that, but what I said is that
but you're against the mission in Afghanistan.
If you had been Prime Minister in 2003, Canadians and Quebecers soldiers would be today in Iraq.
That's not
true or not?
That's not my position.
He said no.
I mean, that was your position in 2003.
Ms. May.
It's very clear that your position as leader of the opposition was to Canada should be part of the coalition of the willing. You argued it. You made the speech. Let's move on from that. The current mission is not a UN mission. The initial NATO process received a UN sanction. It's not the same thing as a UN mission. And if we're going to actually make progress to stabilize Afghanistan, we have got to ensure that it's not perceived as solely a Western nation initiative led by the U.S. That's why 2011 is too late to change the mission, but too early to leave. We need to have a United Nations mission that involves far more countries. We need to go back to do that. And by the way, you're boasting about the fact that most of our development assistance is going to Afghanistan. That's a terrible thing that's happened, is that CEDA's missions have become so politicized that we're turning our back on Africa. We're not helping the poorest of the poor. It's becoming part of our mission in Afghanistan to distort the mission on international development assistance. We need to make poverty history, and I want to know where the other leaders are on 0.7% of our GNP going to overseas development assistance.
Stéphane Dion and Jack Layton.
Mr. Harper is a very imprudent man because of his ideology that is so close to the views of George W. Bush, and he expressed with the words of the Prime Minister of Australia, the Conservative Prime Minister. He is a very imprudent man. What he did about Iraq, he almost did the same about Afghanistan. Now, during the election, he's saying, okay, I will respect the 2011 end date. He said the opposite months after months after months. Our allies hope he will change his mind. We need to have a Prime Minister who will say the same thing in Canada and abroad, that will be trustworthy, that we will believe his words. He will not change always his mind because of his imprudent ideology.
Jack Layton.
A great many Canadians don't want us to continue in Afghanistan until 2011. That's clear. A vote for the Liberals or the Conservatives will not change our long-term commitment or engagement there. And in fact, it will prevent us from reaching some of the targets we have for international aid and assistance, like the Make Poverty History campaign. What we propose is to take the savings when we bring our troops home and use those savings in order to invest in saving lives through the anti-poverty programs. We call it the peace dividend.
Okay,
that represents Canadian values better.
A couple of shots here, so I got to give Mr. Harper 20 seconds to respond.
I do appreciate Stéphane Dion, the Liberal Party support on the resolution that we passed. The truth is, Mr. Dion's position on this mission changed 3 times over the last 3 years, but at least now it's the right position, and I'll give him credit for that.
If you take that shot at him, I got to give him equal time to respond. Then
let me just say this, which is that the parliamentary resolution is precisely what I have communicated to President Sarkozy, to President Bush, to the future presidential candidates, to Prime Minister Brown, to President Karzai. Everybody knows this is Canada's position, and I'm encouraging them to work towards similar goals.
Okay, little response here?
Well, to the contrary, you changed your mind. You said again and again and again that we don't need an end date. It would be a mistake, a failure. We need to stay until the job is not done, whatever that means. I always supported an end date. I want my Canada back. Canadians want their Canada back, a Canada that we may trust in the world, Canada speaking for the cause of justice in the world, not a Canada always following the views of George Bush.
Okay,
even our American friends don't want it anymore.
That is the last word on this segment. We're at question 7 now. 2 to go. 2 to go. Roll tape, please.
Good evening. I'm a retiree building my shed in the backyard here, And I have a question for all you potential prime ministers. My question is, if I should elect you prime minister, what's the very first thing that you're going to do when you get into office? And I don't want any bull feathers, baffles brains answer. I just want the real issue that you're going to tackle.
Okay, no bull feathers, no baffle brains answers, just the real deal here. Jack Layton, first priority once you get into office.
The first thing we'll do is replace Mr. Harper's reckless $50 billion corporate tax cut with investments in the key issues that are affecting families today: the infrastructure of their communities, income security, particularly for low income and seniors, job creation in the key new sectors of the economy, also including environmental investments. That's the priority of an NDP government under Jack Layton.
Gilles Duceppe.
Well, I know I want to be prime minister, and three of you won't be prime minister neither. Some of you know it, but you don't say it. But very clearly, I know I won't be prime minister. That won't stop me of asking the one who will be prime minister to start helping the manufacturing sector and the forestry sector, to start helping the workers who are the first victims of that crisis, to start helping the old age workers particularly, to start helping our seniors who are facing the huge challenges with their health and also their revenue, and also to apply Kyoto will put all the pressure and finally may have consequences to the recognition of the Quebec nation.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Duceppe. Elizabeth May.
Well, first of all, Dennis, I'm really tempted to say that I'd like to do the first thing is come help you finish building the shed. But I think as a woman and a single mom, I'm really good at multitasking. So there'll be more than one thing. But top of the list is we've got to fix our electoral system. We've got to put ourselves on a path to proportional representation so that the will of the voters as expressed in the way people vote is reflected in the House of Commons. And we don't run the risk of false majorities, such as a majority of the seats with a minority of the support. We also need to move forward on the plan to deal with carbon and carbon emissions in a way that stimulates our economy, makes our future more secure. Those are top priorities for Greens. They're top priorities for 80% of Canadians who realize we have a moral obligation to the future to act.
Thank you, Ms. May. Stéphane Dion.
Mr. Peter, first thing I will do, obviously, is to deal with the crisis that we see in the United States and that is already here in Canada, whatever Mr. Harper may pretend. We need to take care of your savings, of your mortgage, of your pension. I need to sit with the institutions that are regulating our savings or pension, and we need to have a plan for that. The first thing I will do, I will prepare an economic and fiscal update to be sure that Canada will have that right and will protect ourselves against this crisis coming. And after, I will certainly appoint the best cabinet Canada ever had to have a fairer, greener, richer Canada.
Thank you, Monsieur Dion. Stephen Harper.
Well, obviously the number one priority of any government has to be to continue to manage Canada during this time of global economic uncertainty. We're clear of the path we will take. We will keep our country in surplus. We will make sure we do not raise taxes. In fact, where we can make affordable tax cuts, we'll make them. One of the tax cuts we've talked about in this campaign is increasing the age exemption for our senior citizens. We're also going to bring in a tax credit for first-time home buyers to help the housing industry. We're going to make sure that we reduce the tax on diesel so that we deal with some of the price increases. We're going to take some competitiveness measures. We're going to reduce taxes a little bit more on small business. We're going to be bringing in recommendations of the Red Wilson panel on competitiveness. We're going to be reducing the paper burden on small business. Okay, all affordable, meaningful measures.
That's your time, Mr. Harper. Jack Layton, you wanted to say.
Well, I've just been listening and waiting for your list, Mr. Harper, because what you haven't done is say that you're going to protect the savings and the pensions and the homes of Canadians and the jobs of those people who are facing these issues around their kitchen table right now. People making ends meet. You're not willing to stand up for them. Your biggest decision, which you didn't include, is to give a $50 billion tax break to Exxon and the banks. And that's wrong. And as to the idea of a meeting, I think an idea of a meeting is good, but are you going to listen to the premiers who are going to attend your meeting, Mr. Dion, and suggest that that this new tax idea you have is a bad idea? Premier McGuinty, a Liberal premier, who's going to suggest it's the wrong way to go and who prefers our approach to dealing with the crisis of climate change? I hope you're going to listen to him.
Mr. Dion?
Well, it's not true. Premier McGuinty did not say that. Many premiers accept our plan as being a good one. So you're inventing something. But you know what, Mr. Layton? In our system, thanks God, federal government is not elected by the provinces. We are elected by the Canadian people. The very moment I'm elected, I have the mandate from Canadians to implement the Liberal plan. And the Liberal plan is a very good one. I'm ready to debate it at any time. We are not increasing taxes. Mr. Harper was not saying the truth. We are lowering taxes on what is creating the wealth in this country.
We should clarify one thing, though, Mr. Dion, which is that it's true the Premier didn't say, I think it's true, the Premier didn't say what Mr. Layton said, but he did say he wouldn't endorse you. The Premier of Ontario said that, and his finance minister and his former finance minister both said this was not the time to implement the green shift. What do you have to say about that?
I will never criticize provinces to make their priority, but the minister was answering to a report written by the chief economist of the TD Bank, Mr. Drummond, one of our best economists in Canada, and a very prudent man. And he was recommending to cut taxes on income and on corporate tax and to shift it to pollution. He said it's a great idea. We need to do it. You need to have politicians courageous enough to do the right things for Canadians. I'm one of them.
Ms. May.
I think the important thing for a Prime Minister to do in meeting with premiers and given all the distortion of the way that tax shifting works, because it was our plan originally, so I'm prepared to defend it because it's a Green Party approach, but it's been used in countries around the world. The fact of the matter is that it's exactly what we need to do right now because it helps make us more energy efficient. It helps take us away from wasteful fossil fuels, which are only going to increase in price as the supply globally of cheap, easily accessible fossil fuels dwindles. So let's do the right thing now and recognize that we do need to cut taxes where they stimulate the economy most, and those are income taxes, those are payroll taxes. And because we're cutting those taxes and we're not reducing the ability of government to run a proper system for the well-being of us all, we replace those taxes with taxes on pollution. And I want to know, Mr. Harper, we're the only party around this table, and I will put it forward because I'd love to know what you think, why we are allowing $5 billion to be taken from Canadian couples, married couples, give the government, they're forced to give the government $5 billion more than they actually owe on their income taxes because of the way married couples have to pay on their combined income. Income splitting is fairer. We can afford it because we tax carbon.
Okay, let's get an
answer. For someone who claims to defend the institution of marriage, why do you punish people who are married?
Let's get an answer.
Well, no, let me answer that. That's a good question because one of the things we did in the last budget was we eliminated the marriage penalty in this country. We made sure that the exemption for a spouse is the same as the personal exemption. Another thing we did is we brought in income splitting for our senior citizens.
Only on their pension income.
For the pensioners of this country.
I should ask Ms. May, how much would it cost?
$5 billion.
$5 billion?
Yeah. And we get it out of carbon
No, we cannot afford $5 billion. But what we can afford, a measure we've brought in, proposed in this election, we'll be bringing in income splitting for those who have a caregiver at home with somebody disabled in their family. That's something we can afford to do and addresses a social concern. Can I just say one other thing, Steve? I think we need to be very clear. We have good systems of financial regulation in our country for mortgages, for banks, for pensions. The only thing that can upset that right now is putting additional taxes on those underlying investments, which is what all the other parties want to do, not to cut other taxes, but to fund a whole bunch of programs that we cannot afford.
Do I infer from that, one second, do I infer from that you will never raise taxes?
I will not raise taxes.
Ever?
I will not raise taxes.
Yes, I heard you saying that we have a good financial regulation. So could you explain why you want to transfer and centralize the Security Commission in Toronto against the will of all people in Quebec, against the will of the Quebec government, against the will of the Parti Québécois, the ADQ, everybody's in Quebec, the business people in Quebec are against that. So you're telling me it's working well. Why do you want to change it? Why do you want to fix it if it's broken?
Okay, you can respond. Can I address that? There's a lot of people in the country looking for national securities regulation. We're not proposing that. We're proposing that we work cooperatively with the provinces to get common securities regulation, and that will not be imposed on any province that doesn't want to participate.
Mr. Dion, last word.
Each time Mr. Harper is telling you something about the Liberal plan, just think about what he did about the income trust. When he broke his word for the people who put their savings in income trust because he gave his word he would never tax them, and he did it, and he never apologized. No, the Liberal plan is not to raise taxes. You may repeat this policy 100 times. It's not true. It will be completely revenue neutral. Each dollar that will raise through the carbon tax will go in the pockets of the people in income taxes and the companies to be more profitable and to have green technologies faster in this country. I care about this country. I want this country to succeed.
You've got to give him 20 seconds to respond. Since you accuse him of breaking his word, he has to respond.
Well, he did break his word on income trust.
Let him explain. Let him explain.
Very quickly, what we had to do in income trust, we had a case where the entire corporate sector was converting. So what we did, so we didn't apply taxes to income trust immediately. We gave a 4-year period, so no income trust is paid taxes. In the meantime, what we did to compensate for that was we brought in lower taxes across the board for companies, and we brought in income splitting for pensioners, which, Stéphane, you said in this election, you voted against, and you said in this election you don't support.
What we support is broad tax cuts for everyone, much deeper than what you're proposing.
So you don't support the income splitting for our pensioners?
We do much better than that. I invite people, Canadians, to see the greenchef.ca. You have a calculator. It will give you the tax cuts you will enjoy.
I got to bring the gavel down here. Hang on, I got to bring the gavel down. We're out of time on this segment. We're out of time in this segment. Freddie, roll the next one. Let's go. Question 8, the last one.
Hello, everyone. I appreciate that we live in a country where we enjoy great rights and freedoms, and being able to vote is a real privilege. However, I haven't voted in the last couple of federal elections. I'm tired of unkept election promises and politicians who kiss babies and care about seniors until the day after the election. How can I, a frustrated young voter, sort through the political rhetoric and decide which is the right person or party to vote for?
We did receive 4,500 emailed questions from Canadians, and this was a familiar theme through many of them. Trust. Monsieur Duceppe, your first time.
Well, I think we have to look very carefully to what people say before an election and what they're doing after the election. Are they representing the people who gave them their confidence? Because if we want to have the confidence of the people, we have to deserve that confidence, not only before the election, but also the time during when we're elected. I think that having said that, when we're looking at the Accountability Act that this government, the upper government, proposed, a lot of words but no action at all, a lot of broken promises, a fixed election date. We're in election today. I mean, there was a fixed election date, guaranteed income supplement for seniors, promised before the election, nothing after that, and a lot of broken promises. I understand those people, but democracy
that's our time. I got to keep us on time here. Elizabeth May, please.
I'm a former lawyer who's become a politician, and I somehow wonder if I've dropped down to a level where I'm just slightly above the paparazzi in terms of public esteem. Politicians, not just in this country but around the world, are losing public trust. And it's because of broken promises. It's because of acting when you win an election as if you've just won the lotto and everyone else just lost, and all the people who voted for you no longer matter anymore. And the only way people are ever going to have confidence in their politicians, if you forget politicians, forget political parties, vote with what you believe in, vote with your heart, and demand better. Canadians need to be engaged in their political life, not just on voting day, but between elections. Demand better of your politicians, because you don't deserve what you've got. You deserve better.
Thank you, Ms. May. Let's go next to Stéphane Dion.
Ms. Cameron, I understand your view, but the premise I don't think is right. Your premise is all the parties are the same. You have an example today. If we would have followed the view of Mr. Harper instead of Mr. Chrétien, Canada would be in the war in Iraq today, with all the damage you may imagine, and the tragedies, and the cost, and so on. We made the good decision. The same about the healthcare system. If the Alliance and the Reform Party would have been there, Medicare would not exist in Canada anymore. We made differences and choices. I want to be Prime Minister of this country because I know that the challenge of the 21st century is nothing less than to reconcile mankind and the planet. And Canada has a role to play for that. It will not play with Mr. Harper, but we will start something great with us Liberals.
Mr. Harper.
What I would say is this. These are very difficult decisions, but I still believe every voter has a responsibility to vote. It's our fundamental democratic right. It's, you know, I travel around the world and I see there are so many places where elections do not happen at all, or they do not happen democratically. We have a precious country where the people are able to change who is in power and to do so peacefully, and we should never let go of that. Now, what we've tried to do, I would challenge any voter to take a look at our platform, take a look at our actions.
Where is it?
We have matched our actions to our platform, I think, in a wide number of issues over a short period of time, 2.5 years. We said we cut the GST 2 points. People thought we couldn't do it. We did. We brought in a universal child care benefit, the Federal Accountability Act. We've started the patient wait times guarantee.
Okay, Mr.
We
Herbert,
brought in
that's your time.
tackling.
We'll
Those
get
were
into
our
more of
promises.
this. We'll get into more of this. Mr. Layton, you get the last word here.
Well, of course, Mr. Harper, you have no program platform this time. You haven't told Canadians what you're going to do. The sweater is nice, but they'd like to know what your plans are, even if you don't intend, if you intend to break the promises. My suggestion is this. We've had the same old parties in power for a long time, and people have become very cynical. And that's because the boardroom tables of this country seem to be able to get a lockhold on either one of these two parties when they're in power, and they seem to be the one that end up with the benefits. You've got an opportunity in this election with the New Democratic Party and with Jack Layton as your Prime Minister to put the issues of the kitchen table front and center each and every day at the cabinet table with our experienced team. We're making that commitment. It's something new. Take a deep breath and go for it.
Thanks, Mr. Layton. Okay, 7 minutes to the finish line here for our final discussion on this issue of trust. And let me flip the issue around a little bit here. Politicians always get creamed for changing their minds. But if circumstances change, should politicians not be entitled to change their minds? Monsieur Dion, you're the opposition leader. You've been hammering him pretty good for the last couple of years, so try that one.
Certainly, I change my mind each time I see a better policy and solution for Canadians, and I explain that. But when you make a commitment, for instance, for the Atlantic Accord, for Atlantic Canadians, and you break your word, as Mr. Harper has done, how can Atlantic Canadians trust him anymore? They have a lot of difficulty to trust them, and for very valid reasons. You're speaking about trust. It's also about what we want to do, and to be very clear about what we want to do. And all the plan that we Liberals are proposing is to bring together our economic growth, our environmental sustainability, and our social justice, our environmental, economic, and social goals. Everything will be for that. Okay. Is the plan we need. And it's a matter of trust, too.
Jack Layton, Stephen Harper, Elizabeth May, Gilles Duceppe. That's the order. Here we go.
Mr. John, I remember Red Book after Red Book. Child care was promised, never delivered. Pharmacare promised, never delivered. The GST was going to be imposed. It was left in place. Fair trade was going to be thrown out. It stayed in place. I mean, you've got a heck of a record there, Mr. Dion, to try and... No wonder we see the cynicism from people out there. And then we have Mr. Harper coming along. He never tells anybody that he's going to give a huge tax break to Exxon in the election. But by golly, that's exactly what he does. And then, meanwhile, people are trying to make ends meet. I remember a time when we said, won't you stand up at least against some of these outrageous fees? And Mr. Harper, you said, yeah, that's a bad thing. Let's send off our ministers to talk to the boardroom tables. The Exxons and the banks of the world told your ministers to get lost.
Okay,
and you did, and cut their taxes.
Get a response.
That's not defending ordinary Canadians.
Let me just correct a couple of words. First of all, the government of Nova Scotia fully acknowledges that we've respected the Atlantic Accord. I know the government of Newfoundland doesn't, but, you know, they didn't like the previous government either, and that's the position that the Premier has taken. But the government of Nova Scotia is clear. It was mentioned earlier about, you know, big companies getting control of parties. One of the most important things our political party did, our government has done, is we eliminated all corporate union contributions from federal politics. We limited all contributions to individuals, to electors, and at the level of $1,000. I think it's now $1,200. I think that has made our party tremendously responsive to voters. One of the reasons we've got so many supporters out there, and I think it's a good reform for our political system that makes it more responsive.
Elizabeth May.
I've got to say, first of all, you did ask a question, Stephen. If Jack hasn't answered, I want to try to answer it. The point is, yes, you can change your mind, but you've got to be honest with people what your reasons were. The reasons on the income trust never added up. There was a very strange Finance Canada calculation that ignored the tax revenue for people who receive dividends from income trusts, so the reasons didn't add up. As for the Atlantic Accord, you may have Minority Premier Rodney MacDonald agreeing with you, but let's face it, Bill Casey still doesn't, and there's reasons that I never will, because the Atlantic Accord was a contract, and it promised Nova Scotians that equalization payments would never form part of the calculation of the revenues from offshore, and you ignored that contract, and Bill Casey showed you you the legal reasoning that what you were doing was breaking a contract. He pleaded with you before he had to vote against the budget, and you ignored that because you decide that if a law is something you don't like or a contract something you don't like, you just sweep it across the table, don't you? You just decide it doesn't matter because your word is law.
Okay,
That's
let's
no
get over
way
here.
for a prime minister to behave.
Gilles Duceppe.
I think, evidently, it's possible to change our mind, but then we have to explain ourselves. It means that if we made an error, we have to explain and admit we made an error. And I'll ask Mr. Harper, one of the errors he made is saying that Quebec has a seat at UNESCO, which is not true, because only sovereign state has a seat at UNESCO. So will you admit tonight that your ad saying that Quebec has a seat at UNESCO is not true, because Quebec is not a sovereign
let's get an answer. Is it?
Well, very simply, Quebec has a seat in the Canadian delegation. Quebec has a formal agreement with the Government of Canada. The Government of Quebec is very happy with to give it a role in UNESCO.
The question is, does Quebec have a seat at UNESCO like you're saying?
It has a seat as part of the Canadian delegation.
So and it works two people in the same seat.
And they're able to talk.
Okay, let's go. Hang on. Hang on. We've got it done here. Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Layton. We had the child care plan in 2006 because of your coalition with Mr. Harper. It did not happen. It will happen the 14th of October if we are elected. We'll have this child care plan back for Canadians. Now,
you have to accept the judgment of voters.
I never assumed this, Mr. Layton. I never assumed.
Hang on, Mr. Layton. Let him finish his answer.
Well,
with the help of Mr. Sackler,
we will have that if we have a Liberal government. It's what I have said. But now, if you interrupt me, I never interrupt you. So, matter of trust. Speaking about trust, it's also to work with others and to not always consider them as enemies each time they disagree with you. Let's say the Canadian Wheat Board, the farmers there, Mr. Harper said, because he disagreed with the way they resist to his attempt to dismantle the Wheat Board, that you will walk all over them. You have said that. Elections Canada, which is an institution celebrated around the world, instead to work with them, you sued them. The head of the Nuclear Safety Commission, when she said there's a problem of safety, you fired her. This is not the kind of leadership we can accept. Okay, we need to have a government that is able to build trust around him.
Literally down to our last minute, he does need a chance to respond to some of these charges. Go ahead.
A couple of them on the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We all know that was a bill before Parliament that was supported by the Liberal Party.
Firing Mrs. Keane was nothing to do with the bill before Parliament.
On the Canadian Wheat Board, the farmers of this country, farmers of Western Canada, voted to have dual marketing, the same marketing freedom as grain farmers in the rest of the country. That is what we are defending, and that's why, by the way, we have virtually every seat among rural Western farmers. They want the right to be able to market their own products while maintaining a strong Canadian Wheat Board, and that's what we're trying to give them.
Well, that's our time. And you know what? This was way better than Biden and Palin. I'm sure of it. I'm absolutely sure of it.
It is our democracy. It matters more here.
Thanks to the party leaders for participating tonight. Thank to all of you for watching tonight. We hope you'll consider what you heard and then get out to vote. Advance polls are open tomorrow, Saturday, and Monday. Election Day, 12 days from now, October 14th. I'm Steve Paikin. Good night from Ottawa.